The convoy rolled through the scorching Texas landscape, raising plumes of dust that hung in the still air like smoke from distant fires. General Heinrich Vogel sat rigid in the back of the military truck, his iron cross still pinned to his torn uniform despite the circumstances. The metal burned against his chest in the afternoon heat, a reminder of a war that now seemed impossibly far away. 3 weeks ago, he had commanded a U-boat flotilla in the Atlantic. Today, he was a prisoner being transported to a facility somewhere in the American interior. The irony wasn't lost on him. The master race, captured by farmers and factory workers, the Third Reich, brought low by men in denim overalls. Beside him sat General Otto Brenner, once commander of a panzer division, now just another defeated soldier staring out at foreign land. 2 more senior officers occupied the opposite bench, their faces carved from stone, revealing nothing. They had been taught not to show weakness. Even in defeat, a German officer maintained dignity. The truck slowed as it passed through a small town. Vogel expected the usual American names, the Anglo-Saxon heritage that dominated this strange new world. Instead, the first sign they passed read, Fredericksburg town limits. He blinked. Fredericksburg. Not Frederick's Ford or Frederick's Mill. Fredericksburg. German. Unmistakably German. The second sign, weathered and painted in fading letters, announced Kraus Hardware and Feed. A third storefront bore the name Schmidt's Bakery. A church steeple rose above the main street, and carved into the cornerstone were the words, Deutsche Evangelische Kirche. 1847. Brenner leaned forward, his composure cracking. Did you see that? I saw it, Vogel replied quietly. The American sergeant riding in the front noticed their reaction and turned, a slight smile playing at his lips. Surprised, generals? Welcome to Texas Hill Country. Been German territory since before most of your families owned their land back home. Vogel's mind raced. This wasn't possible. The briefings had never mentioned this. The propaganda had painted America as entirely hostile, entirely alien to German values. Yet here, in the heart of enemy territory, their language lived in street signs and storefronts. The convoy continued, passing more evidence of this impossible reality. Farmhouses with architectural styles Vogel recognized from Bavaria. A school with a cornerstone reading New Braunfels Schule. A cemetery where every headstone bore German names, Müller, Wagner, Hoffmann, Zimmermann. As the afternoon sun began its descent, casting long shadows across cotton fields that stretched to the horizon, Vogel realized something that made his throat tighten. These weren't just German names preserved as curiosities. These were living communities, people who had carried their heritage across an ocean and planted it in this wild soil. And if they had done that, what else had they brought with them? That night, in the temporary holding facility, Vogel couldn't sleep. The American captain who processed them had been surprisingly forthcoming with information, perhaps believing that broken men posed no threat. You'll be transferred to the main POW camp tomorrow, Captain Wilson had said. Most of the guards there have German surnames. By the way, thought you should know. Might make things easier, might make them harder. We'll see. The words haunted Vogel through the darkness. German guards, Americans with German names. It defied everything he thought he knew about this war. In the morning, a different officer arrived. He was older, perhaps 60, with the weathered face of someone who had spent decades under the Texas sun. His uniform was crisp, his bearing military. But when he spoke, his accent carried the unmistakable lilt of German underneath the American English. I'm Colonel Robert Bauer, he said. I'll be accompanying you to the camp. I understand you have questions. You'll get answers soon enough. The journey resumed. As the convoy rolled through the countryside, Bauer began to speak, unprompted. My grandfather came here in 1846, he said, not looking at the prisoners but gazing out at the landscape. Left Bremen with a group of 40 families, the Adelsverein, they called it, the Society for the Protection of German Immigrants in Texas. They were escaping the revolution, the failed promise of German unification, the crushing poverty that followed the Napoleonic Wars. Vogel listened, transfixed. They bought land from the Republic of Texas before it even joined the United States. Can you imagine? Germans buying land in a republic that was younger than some of their children. They built Fredericksburg first, then New Braunfels, then dozens of smaller settlements. By 1850, there were more than 5,000 Germans in Texas. By 1860, 30,000. Why? The word escaped Vogel's lips before he could stop himself. Bauer turned, meeting his eyes for the first time. Freedom, General. The promise of land ownership. The chance to practice their religion without state interference. The possibility of building something new without the weight of feudal obligations and aristocratic privilege crushing them into the dirt. He paused, letting the words sink in. They brought their work ethic, their discipline, their education. They built schools before they built saloons. They formed musical societies and reading groups. They created a little slice of Germany here, but without the things that had made life in Germany unbearable. Brenner spoke up, his voice harsh. You speak as if they abandoned the fatherland. No, Bauer said quietly. They took the best of the fatherland with them and left the worst behind. There's a difference. The convoy passed a group of farm workers repairing a fence. They wore cowboy hats and boots, but as the trucks passed, one called out to another in perfect German. The words carried clearly through the open window. Hans, bring the hammer. The post is splitting. Vogel felt something shift inside him, like a foundation stone moving beneath a great weight. Midday brought them to a sprawling ranch where they would pause for refueling and a change of guards. The property stretched for miles, dotted with cattle and bounded by fences that ran straight as rifle shots toward distant hills. As the trucks pulled to a stop near a large barn, a figure emerged from the shade. He was tall, broad-shouldered, somewhere in his 50s. He wore dusty jeans, scuffed boots, and a wide-brimmed hat pushed back on his head. A silver star badge glinted on his chest, identifying him as some kind of local law enforcement. When he reached the convoy, he removed his hat and nodded to Colonel Bauer. Then, incredibly, he turned to the prisoners and spoke in flawless German. Guten Morgen, General. Willkommen in Texas. The silence that followed was absolute. The man's accent was pure Hochdeutsch, the formal High German of educated speakers, untainted by regional dialect. It was better German than some of Vogel's own officers spoke. Brenner was the first to recover. You speak German. My first language, the man replied, switching to English. I'm Sheriff Karl Weber. My family has owned this land since 1852. We still speak German at home, though my children prefer English with their friends. He gestured toward the farmhouse, where an American flag hung from the porch alongside a handmade sign that read, Weber Ranch. Est. 1852. Through the open door, Vogel could see a woman setting a table, and on the wall behind her, clearly visible, hung a framed document written in ornate German script. That's my great-grandfather's original land grant, Weber said, following Vogel's gaze, signed by the Republic of Texas, written in German and English both because half the officials in this county couldn't read English back then. One of the other officers, a younger man named Lieutenant Peter Richter, spoke up. You maintain the language, the culture. Yet you fight against Germany. Weber's expression hardened. I maintain the culture my ancestors brought, not the one your government built. There's a difference. He walked closer to the truck, close enough that the guards tensed but didn't intervene. My great-grandfather left Germany because a nobleman's son tried to conscript him into a private army. He came here because he'd rather break his back building something than break it serving someone else's ambition. He taught his children that freedom was worth any price, any hardship. That's the German tradition I honor. Vogel found his voice. We fight for the fatherland, for German greatness. Do you? Weber's gaze was steady, not challenging but questioning. Or do you fight because you were ordered to, because refusal meant death or dishonor, because the alternative was unthinkable? He turned, looking out over his land. My grandfather had a choice. to stay and bow, or leave and stand. He chose to stand. I honor that choice by standing here, on free soil, defending the country that gave us that chance. That's my fight. What was yours? No one answered. The question hung in the hot Texas air like a verdict. They sat in the shade of Weber's barn, while the mechanics worked on one of the trucks. An underground spring kept the barn cool, and Weber's wife brought out water in tin cups. She was a handsome woman, graying at the temples, and she too spoke German when she addressed her husband. Carl, will you need lunch prepared? No, Margaret. They'll be moving on soon. She nodded and returned to the house, but not before casting a curious glance at the German officers. It wasn't hostile. It was the look of someone confronting a puzzle, trying to understand how the pieces fit. Colonel Bauer stood apart, giving Weber and the German officers space. Vogel appreciated the gesture. This conversation needed to happen without American authority hovering over it. Weber leaned against a fence post, casual but alert. You want to ask something? Ask. It was Brenner who spoke. How can you be loyal to America while keeping your German identity? Because they're not contradictory, Weber replied. Being German isn't about serving a government. It's about values. Hard work, education, family, responsibility. Those values work anywhere. They worked when my ancestors built villages in Bavaria. They worked when they built communities here. The land changes, the government changes, the values remain. But your people, Richter pressed. Germany needs all Germans. You've abandoned them, have I? Weber's tone was patient, as if explaining to a child. Let me tell you about my cousin Friedrich. He stayed in Germany, worked his father's farm outside Stuttgart. Good man, followed the rules, did what he was told. When your government came to power, they took his sons, all three of them. 2 died in Poland, 1 in Russia. Friedrich hanged himself in his barn last year. My aunt found him. The silence was crushing. Here, Weber continued, my sons go to school. They'll go to college if they want. They'll inherit land that no one can take from them. They'll marry who they choose. They'll speak their minds without fear. That's not abandonment. That's success. That's what our ancestors wanted for us. Vogel felt something cold spreading through his chest. Not anger, something worse. Recognition. You think we had a choice? He said quietly. I think everyone has a choice, Weber replied. And I think the hardest thing in the world is admitting when you made the wrong one. A mechanic called out that the truck was ready. Weber stood, replacing his hat. There's one more thing you should know, he said. This ranch, I built it with my hands and my family's labor. No one gave it to me. No one can take it away as long as I follow the law. That's the German dream, generals. Not conquest, not glory. Just a man standing on his own land, free. Think about that in your camp tonight. As they loaded back into the trucks, Vogel looked back. Weber stood in front of his barn, hands in his pockets, watching them go. Behind him, the ranch spread out like a kingdom, modest but unassailable. For the first time since his capture, Vogel felt the stirring of something he couldn't quite name. Not quite shame, not quite envy. Something closer to grief. The POW camp sprawled across what had once been a cattle ranch, transformed by necessity into a temporary city of barbed wire and wooden barracks. As the convoy approached, Vogel could see the scope of America's war effort made manifest. Hundreds of prisoners moved within the compound, their gray uniforms like stones in a river of Texas dust. But what struck him most was the sound. German. Everywhere, German. Prisoners calling to each other, guards issuing orders. A group near the fence singing a folk song Vogel remembered from childhood. The language filled the air like smoke, both familiar and alien in this strange context. Colonel Bauer led them through the processing. The American officers were crisp, professional, neither cruel nor kind. They listed names, ranks, service records. They inventoried personal effects. They assigned barracks. And many of them bore German surnames: Wagner, Klein, Meyer, Schneider. This doesn't make sense, Brenner muttered as they were led to their quarters. It makes perfect sense, a voice said behind them. They turned to find an older man, perhaps 70, wearing a camp administrator's armband. His uniform marked him as a civilian advisor, not military. Dr. Ernst Fischer, he introduced himself in German. I'm with the International Red Cross, assigned to ensure compliance with the Geneva Convention. But I'm also a German-American from New Braunfels. I was asked to help facilitate understanding between prisoners and administration. He gestured for them to walk with him. Let me explain something about Texas Germans, Fischer said. We number over 100,000 now. We have our own newspapers, printed in German, our own schools, teaching German history and literature, our own churches, conducting services in German. We have preserved more of the old culture than you might think. While fighting against Germany, Richter said bitterly. While fighting against Nazism, Fischer corrected gently. There's a difference. The Germany my grandparents left in 1848 believed in freedom of thought, in education, in progress. The Germany you served has none of those things. We fight to preserve what was best about German culture, not what became worst about German politics. They reached the barracks assigned to officer prisoners. Through the windows, Vogel could see it was surprisingly comfortable. Beds with mattresses, a stove for heat, shelves with books. You'll find a small library, Fischer continued. We have German classics, Goethe, Schiller, Heine. We have newspapers, though censored for security. We have musical instruments and the freedom to organize educational classes. The Geneva Convention demands humane treatment. America provides it. He paused at the door. Many guards here are German-American. They understand your language, your culture. Some even sympathize with your situation, if not your cause. But understand this, they chose America. Their grandparents chose America. And that choice defines everything about how they see you. That evening, Vogel stood at the fence, watching the sun set over the Texas hills. The colors were magnificent, gold and crimson bleeding across a vast sky that seemed larger than any he'd known in Europe. Beyond the wire, he could see farmhouses with lights beginning to glow in windows. Normal life, continuing as if war were a distant rumor. A guard approached, a young man in his 20s with the sturdy build of a farmer. His name tag read P. Zimmerman. Beautiful, isn't it? The guard said in German. Vogel turned, surprised. You speak German? My grandmother insisted. She came from Hamburg in 1880, died 5 years ago, still speaking German in her dreams. He smiled, but it was sad. She cried when this war started, said it broke her heart to see Germany become what it became. What did it become? Vogel asked, not sure why he was engaging but unable to stop himself. A prison, Zimmerman said simply. A place where fear replaced faith and loyalty replaced love. My grandmother left Germany because it was becoming that even then, in the 1,880 seconds, she said the old Germany died with Bismarck's wars, and what rose afterward was just an empire wearing Germany's face. He looked at Vogel directly. She'd be glad I'm here, guarding this camp. Not because she hated Germans, but because she loved freedom more than nations. That's what she taught me, and that's what every German-American learns. You can love the culture without loving the state. You can honor your ancestors without serving their mistakes. The guard moved on, continuing his patrol. Vogel remained at the fence, wrestling with thoughts he'd never allowed himself to think before. What if they were right? What if everything he'd fought for was built on the betrayal of everything Germany had once meant? The days in the camp developed a rhythm. Wake at dawn, breakfast of adequate if bland food, work details maintaining the grounds, lunch, afternoon recreation or education, dinner, evening reflection. It was structured, predictable, nothing like the chaos of war. Vogel found himself drawn to the library, a converted storage room lined with shelves of books donated by local German-American communities. He picked up a volume of Heine's poetry and was startled to find an inscription on the inside cover. Donated by the Fredericksburg German Heritage Society. 1942. 1942. While U-boats hunted Allied convoys, while panzers rolled across Russia, While bombs fell on cities, German Americans in Texas were donating poetry books to enemy prisoners. The absurdity of it made him want to laugh or weep. He wasn't sure which. "Heine," a voice said. He looked up to see Dr. Fisher settling into a nearby chair. "They banned his books in Germany, didn't they?" "Because he was Jewish. Because he wrote about freedom." "I never agreed with that," Vogel said automatically, then stopped. Had he ever actually disagreed? Or had he simply accepted it as another rule in a system of rules? "It's easier to see clearly from a distance," Fisher said gently. "When you're inside a system, you adapt. You make compromises. You tell yourself that small wrongs are necessary for greater goods, but every compromise erodes you. Every small wrong prepares you for greater ones, until one day you look in the mirror and don't recognize the man looking back." Vogel set the book down carefully. "You think that's what happened to us? I think that's what happens to anyone who trades freedom for security, principles for orders, conscience for duty. It's not unique to Germans. It's a human failing. But Germany embraced it with German efficiency, and that's what made it so terrible." Over the following weeks, Vogel observed the camp with new eyes. He watched German-American guards interact with prisoners, speaking the same language but inhabiting different worlds. He saw prisoners receive letters from home describing destruction and despair, while the Texas countryside beyond the wire thrummed with prosperity and peace. He attended a lecture given by a German-American professor from Austin. The topic was German literature, but the subtext was freedom. Every example, every poem, every story came back to the same theme: the human spirit seeking liberty against oppression. "Do you know why so many Germans emigrated in the 1842? The professor asked. "The failed revolution of 1848, the 48ers, we call them. They tried to create a democratic, united Germany. They failed. The aristocracy crushed them. So they came here and built what they couldn't build there: free communities governed by consent, not decree." Brenner walked out halfway through the lecture, but Vogel stayed. After the talk, he approached the professor, a man named Dr. Lawrence Adler. "Did they forget Germany entirely?" Vogel asked. "The ones who came? No," Adler replied. "They remembered. They taught their children German. They sang German songs. They cooked German food. They even sent money back to relatives in the old country, but they never wanted to go back. Because what they found here was better than what they left. Better than Germany? Better than what Germany had become. Perhaps better than what Germany ever was, at least for common people. Here, a farmer's son could become a doctor. A craftsman's daughter could marry a merchant. No one asked if your grandfather was a peasant or a prince. You made your own way." Vogel thought of his own family. Minor nobility, clinging to fading prestige. His father had been furious when Heinrich chose the Navy over managing the family estate. "A Vogel serves Germany from the land, not the sea," he'd raged. But the land was mortgaged. The estate was decaying. The old order was dying even before the war. Heinrich had joined the Navy to escape, not to serve. He'd just never admitted it. In early October, the camp administration announced something unusual. Selected prisoners would be allowed to attend the Fredericksburg Oktoberfest under heavy guard, as a gesture of goodwill and cultural exchange. The announcement caused immediate controversy. Some prisoners refused outright, seeing it as a betrayal. Others were merely suspicious. But Vogel, driven by something he couldn't quite name, volunteered. They drove into Fredericksburg on a Saturday afternoon, 6 officers under guard of a dozen soldiers. The town square had been transformed. Banners hung from every building. Food stands lined the streets. A bandstand hosted musicians playing accordions and brass instruments. The smell of bratwurst and sauerkraut filled the air. And everywhere, German and English mixed in comfortable chaos. "Zwei beers, please. How much for the schnitzel?" "Danke schön. You're welcome." They were seated at a long picnic table in a roped-off area, guards standing discreetly nearby. Townspeople glanced at them curiously, but without hostility. Children ran past, laughing, one wearing a cowboy hat and another wearing lederhosen. A woman approached their table carrying a tray of food. She was perhaps 70, white-haired, with the weathered grace of someone who had worked hard all her life. "Gentlemen," she said in German, "I hope you enjoy this. My grandmother's recipe. She brought it from Dusseldorf in 1851. She set down plates of sauerbraten and potato dumplings. The smell hit Vogel like a memory. His mother's kitchen, Sunday dinners, a time before the war consumed everything. "Thank you," he managed. She smiled, sad but kind. "My grandson is in Europe right now, fighting. I pray every night he comes home. I pray your family see you again too. War is foolish. Men are precious. That's what my grandmother taught me." After she left, they ate in silence. The food was perfect, rich, savory, exactly as Vogel remembered. Around them, the festival continued. The band played Du liegst mir, I am Herzen, a folk song his mother used to sing. Richter set down his fork, his face twisted. "This is torture. They're mocking us." "No," Vogel said quietly. "They're showing us what we lost." On the bandstand, an elderly man took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, folks, we're going to do something special now. This song has been sung in this town for 100 years. It's been sung in joy and in sorrow. It's been sung in German and English both. And tonight, we sing it for everyone here, including our guests from far away, to remind us all that music transcends borders." The band began playing Die Gedanken sind frei, Thoughts Are Free, the old freedom song, banned in Germany for its revolutionary associations. The crowd joined in, voices rising in German and English both. Die Gedanken sind frei, wer kann sie erraten? Thoughts are free. Who can divine them? Vogel felt something break inside him. He wasn't sure what it was, only that it had been holding something back, and now it was pouring out. His eyes burned, his throat closed. Beside him, he heard Brenner make a sound that might have been a sob. The song continued, hundreds of voices declaring freedom of thought, freedom of belief, freedom of soul. These people sang it proudly, publicly, celebrating a right so fundamental they couldn't imagine life without it. When had Germany lost that? When had fear replaced faith? When the festival ended and they returned to the camp, none of the officers spoke. There was nothing to say. They had seen something that couldn't be unseen. An alternative history, a different path, a version of Germany that had survived by leaving Germany behind. Colonel Bauer visited Vogel in his barracks 3 weeks after the festival. He carried a letter, but he didn't hand it over immediately. "I've been authorized to share information with you," Bauer said, sitting across from Vogel at the small table. "Information from Germany. From liberated areas. Information we've been receiving since the Allies advanced eastward." Vogel's heart clenched. "My family? Your family is fine, as far as we know. Your estate is in the American zone. But this isn't about your family. This is about Germany, about what we're finding." He placed the letter on the table but kept his hand on it. "Before I show you this, I need you to understand something. The information in here will change how you see everything. There's no going back from this. Once you know, you know. Are you prepared for that?" Vogel wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain his ignorance, his loyalty, his sense of having served honorably. But he also knew he'd crossed a threshold that day at the festival. He couldn't pretend anymore. "Show me." Bauer slid the letter across. It was a report from American intelligence, translated into German for prisoner education purposes. It detailed what advancing Allied forces had found in Poland. Camps, industrial facilities, death on a scale that defied comprehension. Vogel read it twice, then a third time. His hands shook. "This can't be real. It's real. We have photographs, testimony, physical evidence. The camps were built to kill, efficiently and industrially. Jews, Poles, Russians, Roma, prisoners of war, millions. We're still counting." Vogel set the letter down. The room spun. "We didn't know. The military didn't know. Some of you knew. Some suspected. Most chose not to ask questions because you didn't want to know the answers. Bauer's voice wasn't harsh, just infinitely sad. That's how evil works, General. It depends on good men looking away. I fought honorably. My men were honorable. We followed the rules of war. Did you? Or did you just convince yourself that following some rules excused ignoring others? That your personal honor mattered more than the system you served? The words hit like artillery. Vogel had no defense because he'd already felt the truth of them. Bauer stood. The German-Americans here, they're not saints. They have their own prejudices, their own failures. But they have something Germany lost: the ability to question authority, to say no. To leave, when leaving, is the only moral choice. Your ancestors could have done that. Instead, they stayed and served. And now, you live with the consequences. He walked to the door, then paused. My grandfather told me something before he died. He said, the worst thing about leaving Germany wasn't the poverty or the danger. It was knowing we were abandoning everyone who couldn't leave. We saved ourselves but left them to drown. That guilt haunted him his whole life. But he also said, better the guilt of escape than the shame of complicity. Think about that. After Bauer left, Vogel sat alone in the darkening room. Outside, he could hear prisoners talking, guards making their rounds, the distant sound of trucks on the road, normal sounds, the mundane machinery of captivity. But nothing would ever be normal again. 3 months into his captivity, Vogel received permission to write letters home. The first went to his wife, Anna. He told her he was safe, that he was being treated well, that he hoped she and their son remained unharmed. He asked after the estate, the neighbors, the village church. He didn't tell her what he'd learned, didn't describe the camps or the revelations or the slow dismantling of everything he'd believed. How could he? What words existed for that? The second letter he wrote was never sent. He wrote it to himself, or perhaps to the man he'd been before Texas, before the German farmers, before the festival and the terrible truths. I believed I was serving Germany, he wrote. I believed I was protecting our people, our culture, our way of life. I never asked who defined our people, or why so many had to be excluded for us to be safe. I never questioned why our culture required the destruction of all other cultures. I accepted the narrative because questioning it was dangerous, and because accepting it was easier than exile. He described Sheriff Weber's ranch, the festival in Fredericksburg, the German-Americans who had built a culture of freedom, while Germany built a culture of obedience. They took the best of us with them, he wrote. Our work ethic, our love of learning, our dedication to family and community. They left behind our worst, our tribalism, our militarism, our deference to authority. They proved that being German is not about serving Germany. It's about living by principles. And the principles that matter are universal. Freedom, dignity, justice, truth. He burned the letter that night, watching the paper curl and blacken in the stove. Some truths were too dangerous even for private correspondence. But a week later, Dr. Fisher approached him during afternoon exercise. I hear you've been asking about immigration procedures, Fisher said casually. Vogel glanced around, but no one was within earshot. I've been curious about the historical processes, how people managed it in the 19th century. Of course. Historical curiosity. Fisher's tone was carefully neutral. Well, historically speaking, the process after a war is often more open than during peace. Countries need workers to rebuild. Skilled men, especially officers with education and leadership experience, they find opportunities, particularly if they're willing to commit fully to their new home. That would require renouncing the old one. Not renouncing, transcending. You don't stop being German. You just become something more. German-American, a hyphenated identity that honors both sides while being fully loyal to the side you choose. Vogel watched prisoners walking the fence line, men who would return to a Germany that no longer existed, to serve a regime that had betrayed everything they thought they were fighting for. Is that even possible now? After everything? Possible? Yes. Easy? No. Required? That depends on whether you can live with yourself if you don't at least try. Fisher walked away, leaving Vogel with a question that would haunt his remaining months in the camp. The war ended in May 1945. News filtered into the camp slowly, censored and sanitized, but the essentials were clear. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The Reich was no more. The Führer was dead. Everything they'd fought for had collapsed into rubble and shame. Vogel sat in the library, a book open in front of him but unread, watching other prisoners react. Some wept, some sat in stunned silence, a few cheered quietly, glad the killing had stopped even if it meant defeat. Richter approached him, face haggard. "What do we do now?" "We endure," Vogel said. "We wait. We decide who we'll be when this is over. I'm going home, back to my family's farm in Saxony. That's in the Soviet zone now." Richter's face hardened. "It's still home, still Germany. I won't abandon it like these cowards did." He gestured vaguely toward the guards, the camp, the whole German-American community beyond the wire. They didn't abandon it. They saved what mattered most and let the rest burn. Maybe that's not cowardice. Maybe that's wisdom. "You've changed," Richter said, and it was an accusation. "Yes," Vogel agreed. "I have." 6 months later, during the processing for repatriation, Colonel Bauer pulled Vogel aside one final time. "You have a choice," he said bluntly. "You can return to Germany, stand trial for war crimes they've determined you were never directly involved in atrocities, so you'll likely be cleared, and then try to rebuild your life in the ruins. Or you can apply for asylum. It's not automatic. It's not easy. You'll need sponsors. You'll need to prove your commitment to democratic values. You'll need to swear loyalty to the Constitution, to America, to everything Germany rejected. But it's possible." Vogel thought of Sheriff Weber standing on his own land. Free. He thought of the Fredericksburg Festival, voices rising in songs of freedom. He thought of Dr. Fisher's quiet wisdom and Colonel Bauer's patient teaching. He thought of Germany, burning in the ruins of its own choices. "I'll need time to consider." "Of course. But, General Heinrich, time is the one thing Germany doesn't have anymore. The window closes fast. Make your choice while you still can." That night, Vogel wrote another letter to Anna. This one, he would send. "My dearest," he began. "What I am about to propose will seem like betrayal, but I believe it is the only way forward, the only path that honors the best of what we were while leaving behind the worst of what we became." He wrote for 3 hours, explaining everything. The German farmers, the festival, the truth about the camps, the realization that loyalty to Germany had become complicity in evil, and that true honor meant choosing a new path. "I am asking you to leave everything," he wrote, "to bring our son and join me in building something new. Not as Germans in Germany, but as German Americans in America. We will keep our language, our traditions, the parts of our heritage worth keeping, but we will pledge ourselves to freedom, to democracy, to the principles our ancestors should have fought for but never did." He sealed the letter, knowing it might end his marriage, knowing it would cost him everything familiar and comfortable, but also knowing it was the only way to live with himself. 3 weeks later, he received her reply. It was short. "I have always followed where you led," Anna wrote, "but this time, I choose to follow not because you are my husband, but because you are finally right. Begin the papers. We will come, and we will teach our son what it means to be free." Heinrich Vogel never became a U.S. citizen. The paperwork took too long, and he died of a heart attack in 1952 while working construction in New Braunfels, helping build the town's new hospital. But his wife did, his son did, his grandchildren were born citizens, native to the land their grandfather chose. At his funeral, Sheriff Carl Weber spoke briefly. "Heinrich asked me once what it meant to be German-American. I told him, it means you can love where you came from without being imprisoned by it. It means you can honor your ancestors without repeating their mistakes. It means you carry the best of the old world into the new and leave the worst behind." He paused, looking at the casket draped with an American flag. Heinrich learned that lesson late, but he learned it well, and he lived by it. That's all any of us can do. Choose the right path, even when it costs everything, especially when it costs everything. In the cemetery, Heinrich Vogel's headstone bore two inscriptions. One in English, Heinrich Vogel, 1898 to 1952, who chose freedom. One in German, from Heine's band poetry, Die Gedanken sind frei. Thoughts are free. His grandchildren visit every Memorial Day, leaving flowers and small American flags. They speak English with their friends, German with their grandmother. They know their history, both the shameful parts and the redemptive ones. They know what their grandfather learned in a POW camp in Texas, that identity is not destiny, that culture is not fate, and that the greatest courage is the willingness to choose a new path when the old one leads to darkness. The German towns of Texas still stand, Fredericksburg, New Braunfels, and dozens of smaller communities. They still celebrate Oktoberfest, still teach German in their schools, still cook the old recipes and sing the old songs, but they sing them in freedom, in a land their ancestors chose specifically because it offered what the fatherland could not: the right to be themselves without permission, to build without asking, to question without fear. That's the legacy those German generals found on a dusty Texas road in 1943. Not a betrayal of Germany, but its salvation preserved by those who loved it enough to leave it behind.